Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty deep waters today. We're tackling linguistic philosophy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at how language shapes, truth, knowledge, even the mind itself.
Hmm.
We're unpacking some dense academic writings. Get ready for some serious mental gymnastics here.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can philosophy actually ever be a strict science?
Hmm.
Does language trap us in these philosophical quandaries?
Hmm.
Let's see what we can find out.
Yeah. So to kick things off, it all begins with this thing called the linguistic term,
Okay,
a
yeah.
massive shift in philosophy
Okay.
where thinkers, they really started focusing on analyzing language itself
Okay.
instead of just pondering these really abstract concepts.
So instead of asking, like, what is truth,
Yeah,
they're asking, how does the word truth function in our language?
exactly.
It's like realizing the tool we use to think might actually be influencing what we think.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And one thinker who really dove headfirst into this was Gustav Bergman.
Okay.
He believed that many philosophical problems were actually just problems with language.
Okay.
That if we could just construct this perfectly clear, unambiguous language,
Like an ideal language.
an ideal language, exactly, a lot of these philosophical puzzles, they would just vanish.
So he's kind of saying if we could just make language as precise as math,
Yeah,
philosophy could be like a science with clear-cut answers.
exactly. That was his thinking.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a bold statement.
It is, and it's really appealing to a lot of people. This idea of the ideal language is appealing because of its precision.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a language where every single word just has one fixed meaning,
Uh-huh.
and the rules of logic are just baked right in.
Yeah, yeah.
Then philosophical debates could be settled just like mathematical equations.
Yeah, like no more ambiguity, no more vagueness.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can see how that would be appealing to some philosophers.
Mhm.
This dream of a world where, there's no more arguing about the meaning of words.
Yeah.
But isn't human experience like way too messy and nuanced to be captured by this perfectly structured language?
Yeah, and that's the core of the debate, isn't it?
Right.
That's where this idea of ordinary language philosophy comes in.
Okay.
And they kind of push back against this whole idea of inventing this artificial system.
Hmm.
And they argue that everyday language, with all of its flaws and quirks, that's where philosophy should actually begin.
Right.
After all, it's the language that we actually use to think, to live our lives, to argue about philosophy.
So instead of creating this perfect language in a lab, they're saying, let's just look at the language we already have.
Yeah.
Warts and all.
Warts and all, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe the answers are hidden in plain sight.
Hmm.
So, ordinary language philosophers, they believe that a lot of philosophical problems pop up because we misinterpret how we use words in everyday life. For example, take the word knowledge.
Yeah.
We use it in so many different ways in so many different contexts.
Right. Right.
They'd say, by analyzing these everyday uses, we can untangle some pretty complex philosophical knots.
Okay, so like looking at the context and how we actually use the word in our everyday lives.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But wouldn't that approach make philosophy incredibly subjective then?
That's...
After all, ordinary language changes over time. It varies between cultures.
Yeah.
So how can you build like a rigorous philosophical system on something so fluid and changing?
Right. And that's a key challenge for ordinary language philosophers,
Yeah.
How do you balance this richness and flexibility of everyday language
Right.
with the need for clarity and rigor in philosophical analysis?
Yeah.
It's a question that they are constantly grappling with.
So we've got these two very different approaches here.
Yeah.
Striving for this perfectly logical language versus embracing the messiness of everyday speech. Where do you land on this debate?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't think it's a simple case of better or worse.
Okay.
They each have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
They both offer valuable insights into the relationship between language and thought.
So are we basically saying that these philosophers are just arguing about semantics?
No.
If philosophy is all about analyzing language,
Yeah.
does it actually tell us anything about reality itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
Yeah.
it? And it's one that we'll be exploring in more depth as we go through this deep dive.
Okay.
Does focusing on language clarify these philosophical problems, or does it distract us from deeper truths?
Right.
Stick with us as we dig deeper into this fascinating debate.
Let's do it.
To really get a handle on the difference between these two approaches,
Yeah.
let's look at some concrete examples. So
Right.
on the ideal language side,
Yeah.
There's this really fascinating concept called logical construction.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
So imagine you're trying to define the word table,
Okay.
right? But instead of relying on our everyday understanding of what a table is,
Yeah.
we're going to break it down into like its simplest logical components.
Okay.
So can we define it as just a collection of sense data?
Hmm.
Or maybe like a set of physical properties?
Okay.
And the idea here is to create a language that is so precise
Yeah.
that philosophical problems about the nature of tables
Mm.
can't even be formulated
Oh, wow.
because we've already defined exactly what a table is in our ideal language.
So that's like saying, let's just eliminate philosophical confusion by defining our terms with absolute precision.
Exactly.
It's ambitious,
It is. It
to
is.
say the least.
But it's very appealing to some.
I can see the appeal.
You know, Bertrand Russell, his work on the concept of tables
Mhm.
is like a classic example of this approach.
Right.
He tried to break down our everyday understanding of tables into these series of logical statements, just like eliminating any ambiguity or vagueness.
So, yeah, that's a great example for like the ideal language side of things.
Yeah.
What about ordinary language philosophy?
Okay.
How would they tackle a philosophical problem?
Well, one example that comes to mind
Yeah.
is the statement, Mr. Pickwick is a fictitious person.
Yeah. Okay.
Seems pretty simple, right?
Yeah. On the surface, but I can see where this is going.
It raises all these questions about existence, fiction, the limits of language.
Right. Like, can a fictional character really be a person?
Right.
And what does that even mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, it gets meta pretty quick.
It does.
Yeah.
So an ordinary language philosopher, they
Yeah.
wouldn't get all bogged down in like these abstract theories about existence.
Okay.
Instead, they would look at how we actually use the word fictitious in everyday conversations.
Okay.
Right. We don't say Mr. Pickwick is a fictitious kind of person.
Right.
We just say he's fictitious, period.
Yeah.
And by analyzing this usage, they'd say that philosophical problems, they arise when we try to force fictional entities into these categories that are designed for real things.
So it's about paying attention to the nuance of everyday language
Exactly.
and not imposing some, like, artificial system from above.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
I like that approach, but
Yeah.
doesn't that run the risk of just kind of accepting whatever people happen to believe at the time?
Sure.
What if, like, common sense is just wrong?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And ordinary language philosophers, they have to grapple with that.
Yeah.
How do you challenge common sense beliefs while still grounding your analysis in everyday language?
Yeah.
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
Our sources highlight another good example
Okay.
of the ordinary language approach. And these are statements about knowledge.
Right.
Like, we know there's cheese on the table.
Right. A simple statement.
Simple statement. But it just hides this, like, whole world of philosophical complexity.
Yeah. What does it really mean to know something? What are the criteria for knowledge?
Yeah.
Can we ever be absolutely certain?
Right.
Big
But-
questions.
And I'm guessing ordinary language philosophers would say that by examining how we use the word know
Yeah.
in different situations,
Yeah.
we can start to maybe gain some real philosophical insight.
Exactly. They'd analyze like how we justify our knowledge claims,
Mhm.
how we deal with doubt,
Yeah.
and how we distinguish between knowledge, belief, and just mere opinion.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And by doing so, they argue that we can illuminate these complex philosophical concepts in a way that like connects with our actual lived experience.
So even with these compelling examples,
Right.
it seems like we're still left with this fundamental question of,
Yeah.
if philosophy is primarily about analyzing language,
Mhm.
does it tell us anything about reality itself?
Right.
Or is it just like a sophisticated word game, as some critics might say?
Yeah, that is the heart of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does focusing on language clarify our understanding of the world? Or does it distract us from, like, the real issues?
It's almost like asking, can we ever step outside of language to grasp the world as it truly is?
Yeah.
Or are we forever trapped within the boundaries of our own words?
It's a question that's haunted philosophers for ages.
Yeah.
And there are different perspectives on this.
Okay.
Some argue that we can never fully escape the limitations of language,
Hmm.
that our very thoughts are actually shaped by the words that are available to us.
So our language is like a lens that shapes how we see the world.
Yeah.
But does that mean there's no reality outside that
I think
lens?
it's a debate, right?
Yeah.
Is there some objective truth out there,
Yeah.
independent of our words and concepts?
Right.
Or is truth relative to the language that we happen to speak?
That's a pretty mind-blowing idea.
It is.
That would mean that there's no single absolute truth,
Right.
but rather multiple perspectives on reality,
Yeah.
each with its own, like, validity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this leads to another question.
Okay.
You know, if language plays such a crucial role in shaping our understanding,
Right.
can philosophy ever be truly objective? Or is it always, influenced by the particular language and culture of the philosopher?
So are we saying that there's no way to escape our own subjective biases? Or is there some way to find, like, common ground even across different languages and cultures?
That's a question that has no easy answers.
Right.
And it takes us to the very heart of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
To think, to communicate, to make sense of the world around us.
Wow. So we've gone through this whole world of ideal languages.
Yeah.
Ordinary language.
Right.
We've really seen how they grapple with these big, big questions in philosophy.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
But where does this leave us? Like, if language shapes our reality, can we ever really understand the world, like, as it is?
Right, like independent of our words and concepts.
Yeah, it's a dizzying thought to consider that.
It is.
That the very structure of our language might be shaping how we see things.
Yeah, it's like realizing that the map you've been using your whole life might not perfectly reflect the territory.
Yeah, it makes you kind of question everything, you know?
Yeah.
Is there even, like, such a thing as objective truth? Or are we all trapped within these confines of our own languages? It's a pretty daunting idea.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
Because if we acknowledge that, language shapes our understanding,
Yeah.
it opens up all these possibilities, all these different perspectives,
Okay.
multiple ways of making sense of the world.
So instead of searching for the one true answer,
Right.
we should be embracing all this diversity
Exactly.
of language and thought.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Each language is like a different window onto reality, offering this unique perspective.
Okay.
No single window can capture the whole picture.
Right.
But by looking through all these multiple windows, we can gain a richer, more nuanced understanding.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Oh, thanks.
So instead of getting, like, bogged down
Yeah.
in these arguments about which language is the correct one,
Right.
we should be celebrating the fact that there's so many different ways of expressing
Exactly.
human thought and experience.
Yeah, and that's where I think the real value of philosophy lies.
Okay.
Not in finding those definitive answers,
Hmm.
but in, like, exploring this vast and ever-evolving landscape of language and thought.
So it's less about, like, winning an argument
Yeah.
and more about expanding our understanding
Right.
through dialogue and, open-mindedness.
Exactly. Recognizing that even, the simplest words we use carry so much weight. History, culture, meaning by paying attention to how we use language, we can gain a much deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
Yeah, this is a powerful takeaway,
Yeah.
It makes philosophy
Yeah.
feel less intimidating and more relevant to our everyday lives.
And that's what we've been trying to do in this whole deep dive.
Right.
To show that philosophy isn't just this, like, abstract academic thing,
Yeah.
but it's really a way of engaging with the world in a more thoughtful and critical way.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
We started with this idea of, like, a perfectly precise language,
Right.
explored the messiness of everyday speech,
Yeah.
and ended up, contemplating the very nature of truth and reality.
Big questions.
Yeah, big, big questions.
But hopefully we've given you some food for thought.
Yeah.
Some new tools for thinking about language and its role.
Absolutely. So the next time you're having, a philosophical debate with someone,
Yeah.
just remember, it's not just about winning the argument.
Right.
It's about understanding how our words shape our thoughts
Yeah.
and how our thoughts shape how we see the world.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe, by paying attention to these nuances of language, we can find new ways to connect with each other, to bridge divides, and maybe even build a more understanding and compassionate world.
It's a goal worth striving for.
It is. It is.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, that's a great place to end it.
Keep those mental gears turning.
Yeah. And we'll see you on the next adventure.
Into the world of ideas.
See you next time.